Hey everybody, my name is Adam. This video I'm making is for a project in my cultural anthropology class. If anyone watches this that isn't in my class, cultural anthropology is basically the study of human beings in about every aspect a person can be studied. Our professor gave us this assignment as a way to look into the different perspectives of cultural anthropology. Let's just say that there were quite a few to choose from, and I feel that I picked one of the hardest. The theory I chose to research is called diffusionism. And I know this sounds crazy, but I picked it because the way it was described in the textbook was funny. And in a roundabout way, I sort of agree with the theory. But the initial grab to this theory was because the text literally states that one school of thought held the belief that, and I quote, people borrow from others because they are basically uninventive. Maybe it doesn't grab your attention, but it does mine. This theory was difficult to research because anthropologists have long disregarded this theory because it's so black and white. Let me give you a little bit of a background on this, and I'll explain to you why I feel it has some merit. Diffusionism was introduced in the late 19th century, and there were three different perspectives that established themselves: the British, the German-Austrian, and the American. The earliest two ideas were from the British and the German-Austrian schools of thought. Both of them held the same basic principle notion that people borrow from others because they're basically uninventive. The difference in the approaches lies in where each believed that the inventions had started. Anyways, towards the early 20th century, the American perspective developed, and to simplify their theory, I'm going to show you this drawing. So we have a culture area, which is this area here in pink, and in the middle we find a geographical culture center here. It's in this center where traits and changes develop, then spread outward throughout the culture area, which in my opinion makes the most sense. Because of the extreme ideas posed within this theory, and by that I mean that people are uninventive, anthropologists abandoned this idea of culture change a long time ago. I guess people didn't like the fact that they were being called unimaginative. Apparently that's the equivalent to being dumb. It is, however, undeniable that change does occur through the process of diffusion. Some of the history on the theory of diffusionism states that early thought contained ideology mimicking Darwin, and I quote, "Social forms were like life forms, migrating over diverse habitats if not presented with geographical obstacles to movement, sustaining adaptive modifications as their circumstances changed." This is where my thinking begins to show. If we look at it as Darwin did, then I think we are onto a more plausible way of explaining some of our culture change. My examining the basic elements involved the grand idea of diffusionism. It's easier to see how the theory comes into play with culture change. Diffusion, by definition, is spreading something widely. Evolution, by definition, is gradual development from simple to complex. Darwin's theory of natural selection basically stated that those organisms with a marginal advantage in the struggle for existence live long enough to procreate. All About Science, which is a website, and you can Google that, goes even a step further into simplifying the end result of natural selection. Over time, beneficial mutations accumulate, and the result is an entirely different organism, not just a variation of the original, but an entirely different creature. When I was doing my research for this paper, I came across a journal article by this guy, Blot. Basically, his article was about how the early idea of diffusionism clearly is too black and white and really doesn't give people credit, because we all know humans of every race, ethnicity, sex, and etc. do have the capability to be inventive. If we step back a little bit and soften the edges of the theory, we may find that more people would be able to accept it. This was what Blot was attempting to say. Taking these different ideas, combining and modifying them, a new thought process of diffusionism has begun to develop. Quoting Blot, "It denies that some places or people are more inventive than others, and it denies that innovation is rare. It assumes only the level of inventiveness needed to produce modest modifications of existing traits. It gives to diffusion, not to independent invention, the main causal role in culture change." Okay, so now that I've given some history and information on the topic of diffusionism that you have hopefully followed, I want to showcase why I think this theory works. My case in point, the way wars are fought today are drastically different from how they were fought 50 years ago, let alone hundreds of years past. In essence, they've become an entirely different creature. Even looking at the broadest spectrum of war, if you think back to how wars were fought when the opposing sides met in an empty field, lined men up and shot at each other, or just straight up clashed in the middle and just did hand-to-hand combat, and compare it to our idea of war today. War today is mostly about stealthiness and bombing ability, but it's taken hundreds and thousands of years of innovations and modifications to weaponry and tactics to get us to this level of warfare that we're at. And with diffusion, we can clearly see that it's not something that just affects 2 or 3 cultures. These changes have spread throughout many different cultures. Let's start at the Civil War, and the changes brought by this war alone. This war was considered by many to be the first of modern wars. Most of the changes we see in this war developed from the start of the Industrial Revolution. Because of the new and improved methods weaponry could be produced by, military technology became greatly sophisticated. A few specific examples include the introduction of the connoidal bullet, which increased accuracy and range due to its improved shape and components, and later the Gatling gun, which was the first of the machine guns, and I don't think any further explanation is needed for that one. The machine gun took hold during World War I, and we also saw the introduction of battle tanks and aircraft bomber technology was developing. After World War I, improvements in weapons were shown on a small scale, and tanks and aircrafts were greatly improved by the start of World War II. The new tactics and weapons of the Second World War, such as massive air raids and the atomic bomb, made warfare incomparably more deadly than before to both military and civilian populations. We all know about Pearl Harbor and then the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The introduction of the atomic bomb forever changed warfare. To this day, the incorporation of nuclear bombs has substantially changed the tactics of warfare. Nuclear warfare is a leading military tactic for the major world powers. Even with the recent disaster in Japan, we know that they were armed with nuclear weapons and even know approximately how many they had. I read an article in Popular Mechanics about nukes, and the explanation as to the big deal behind these bombs was explained like this. Of the 3 kinds of delivery systems, the aircraft, the submarines, and the missiles, ICBMs promise the fastest response to any enemy's nuclear attack, or can launch quickly enough to prevent one. Submarines are virtually undetectable, and nuclear bombers can strike with precision, but only intercontinental missiles are always ready to deliver a nuke, undeterred, anywhere in the world within minutes. And that's crazy, but pretty effective. And it also makes another point about change in wars. Back in the day, like I had said earlier, wars were fought on battlefields. Nowadays, everywhere is a battlefield. The place where Popular Mechanics went to write their article was a town in Montana. Now I know that these are just a few examples, and there are hundreds of thousands more examples of how war and weapons have evolved over time, but I think that they are fairly understandable changes that have developed over time. Each war that has been fought throughout history has brought some new element to the table that has either succeeded or failed. That is exactly what natural selection is. And also, indirectly or directly, I guess that's however you want to look at it, what diffusion is as well.